There's a specific kind of suffering that doesn't get talked about enough. Not the suffering of someone who doesn't know what they want. The suffering of someone who knows exactly what they want, can see it clearly, has thought about it for months or years, and still can't make themselves move toward it. You wake up with intentions. You go to sleep with guilt. And somewhere in between, the day happened to you rather than the other way around. Here's what's underneath that. Not the version that makes you feel better about it. The complete version. The thing stopping you isn't discipline. It isn't motivation. It isn't even fear of failure in the way you've probably framed it. It's something more specific. Something most people who experience it never quite name. And the unnamed thing keeps running, whether you're aware of it or not. Let's start with the neurological reality. Piers Steele, a psychologist at the University of Calgary whose 2007 meta-analysis covered 691 studies on procrastination, arrived at a conclusion that reframes the entire conversation. Procrastination is not laziness. It's not poor time management. It's a failure of emotional regulation. The task you're avoiding isn't the problem. The feeling the task generates is the problem. Your brain encounters the goal and registers not excitement, but threat, uncertainty about whether you'll succeed, discomfort at the effort required, exposure to the possibility of finding out something about yourself you'd rather not know. And your brain, which is not interested in your long-term flourishing, but is extremely interested in your immediate comfort, offers you an exit. Every time you take it, the brain learns that avoidance resolves discomfort. The pattern deepens. Roy Baumeister at Florida State University found that self-regulation operates like a finite resource, depleted by use, restored by rest. The person who spends the morning fighting themselves to start arrives at the afternoon already depleted, not because they're weak, because they spent their regulation capacity on the fight rather than the work. Worth noting, Baumeister's ego depletion findings have faced replication challenges since 2016. What remains consistent is the underlying principle. Resistance has a cognitive cost. The fight to start is not free. This is why discipline alone fails. Something more precise is required. Here's the specific fear underneath the avoidance. Underneath the scrolling and the postponing and the elaborate rituals of almost starting, there is a fear most people never fully articulate. Not the fear of failure exactly, something more precise. It's the fear of trying fully and finding out the result doesn't match the dream. Right now, the dream is still intact. The book is still potentially brilliant. The best version of you is still theoretically available. The fantasy is protected by the fact that it has never been tested, and some part of your brain has learned that the fantasy feels better than the attempt, because if you never fully try, the verdict never comes in. Carol Dweck at Stanford documented this with precision. People who believe ability is fixed experience effort itself as threatening. If talent is innate, then trying hard and failing doesn't just mean the attempt failed. It means you failed. The question you've been quietly avoiding has been answered in the worst possible way. That's the specific fear underneath most chronic avoidance. Not what if I fail, but what if I find out I was wrong about myself? And here's what makes it so difficult to overcome without naming it first. The fear doesn't present itself as fear. It presents itself as not feeling ready, as needing more information, as the plan not being quite right yet. It disguises itself as reasonable caution so effectively that you can spend years in its grip without identifying it as what it is. Naming it precisely changes your relationship to it. You can't dissolve it by understanding it, but you can stop letting it make decisions on your behalf without your knowledge. Here's what the research says about breaking the pattern. B.J. Fogg, a behavioral scientist at Stanford whose work on habit formation has influenced more behavior change programs than almost any other researcher in the field, makes one finding central to everything else. Motivation is the wrong target entirely. Motivation is an emotion. Emotions are unreliable, context-dependent, and structurally incapable of sustaining effort through difficulty. Building a life on motivation is building a house on weather. What Fogg's research demonstrates is that durable behavior change happens through design, the deliberate arrangement of your environment so the desired behavior requires less friction than the avoidant one. The phone in another room, because its presence isn't a test of willpower, it's an architectural flaw. Work beginning at a fixed time that becomes automatic rather than decided each day, because removing the decision removes the depletion. The task reduced to its smallest starting unit. Not write the chapter, but open the document. Actions small enough that the brain's threat detection system doesn't register them as threatening, because beginning is the hardest neurological moment, and completion follows far more naturally than pre-start anxiety predicts. But here's what Fogg's framework requires that most productivity content omits, and omitting it is why the techniques work for a week and then stop. Environment design holds when paired with a specific belief shift. Dweck's research is direct. People who understand that ability is built rather than revealed persist differently when the first attempt is worse than the dream. The bad first draft doesn't confirm the verdict they feared. It starts the process they expected. That shift, from effort as exposure to effort as construction, is what makes the environment design hold rather than collapse at the first difficulty. You need both. Neither works without the other. Here's the cost that accumulates while the pattern runs. Every day, the gap between intention and action persists. Something is happening beneath the practical cost that is harder to see and more damaging to reverse. You are teaching yourself, through accumulated evidence rather than conscious decision, that you are someone who doesn't follow through. Your brain updates its model of who you are based on what you actually do, not what you intend, not what you're capable of in theory, but what you demonstrably and repeatedly do. Every day of avoidance is a data point in a case being quietly built against your own self-belief. Dweck's mastery experience research shows the mechanism. Self-efficacy is constructed through completion. Evidence accumulated over time that you are someone who does what they set out to do. The avoidance pattern doesn't just cost you the output, it costs you the self-belief that makes the next attempt more likely to succeed. The longer the pattern runs, the heavier the next start becomes. Not because the task gets harder, but because the person approaching it has progressively less evidence they're someone who can do it. Not the lost time, the eroding belief. Kristen Neff at the University of Texas is precise on what follows. The guilt after avoidance is not the solution to the pattern. When guilt becomes shame, shame becomes the weight that makes tomorrow's start feel more loaded than today's. The guilt feeds the cycle it appears to be fighting. Self-compassion without accountability is self-indulgence. But self-criticism without self-compassion is just avoidance wearing a different face. The move her research supports: acknowledge what happened, extract what's useful, return to the attempt without carrying every previous failure into the next one. Not forgiveness as absolution, forgiveness as reset. Here's what the research collectively argues. As a verdict, not a summary. You are not lazy. Laziness implies an absence of desire. What you're experiencing is the opposite. Desire strong enough to be threatening, protected by a pattern of avoidance sophisticated enough to feel like something else entirely. Steele says the pattern is emotional regulation failure, not character failure. Baumeister says resistance has a cognitive cost. Willpower alone cannot absorb. Fogg says the environment must be designed so the pattern has less to work with. Dweck says the belief that effort reveals rather than builds ability is what makes the fear of trying feel rational. Neff says the self-criticism after each cycle is not the corrective, it's the continuation. What these 5 bodies of research argue together, the claim that only becomes visible when all of them are considered, is that this pattern isn't a character trait to overcome, it's a system to understand. And systems, unlike character, can be redesigned. The unnamed thing running beneath your avoidance has a name now. It's a nervous system doing exactly what nervous systems do when they encounter threat, protecting you from pain in the short term at the cost of everything you want in the long term. Once you can see the system clearly, you can start making different decisions inside it. The exit doesn't feel like a breakthrough. It feels like opening a document when you don't feel like it. Writing one sentence in imperfect conditions. Taking the small action without waiting for the state that would make it feel safe. And then discovering, again until the evidence accumulates, that the fear before starting was larger than the reality of starting. That discovery, repeated, builds something no amount of planning or self-criticism can build from the outside. Evidence that you are someone who follows through. The unnamed thing that kept running? It runs quieter now. If this names something you've been carrying, the pattern, the fear underneath it, or both, drop a comment. And if you want content that takes the psychology of how you actually think seriously, subscribe. We make videos for people who'd rather understand themselves than feel better about themselves. That's the difference.